I hereby grant thee access to the great nation of Canada. Open the gate! Oh, I'll do it. Hold on. There we go.
Well, I had some great feedback on the last video I did, which covered my whole journey from the US to Canada. So a lot of the comments I had were around permanent residency, the points system, the express entry system. So I thought I would do a little deeper dive into what is the hardest stage of all the stages, permanent residency. So let's talk about it. Hey, I'm getting new subscribers every day. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and that way it'll end up in other people's feeds. At the end, I'm going to present the statistics to show you that even if you have a low score, you still have a great chance of getting in. Also, expect to see a few outtakes at the end of this one. So like I said in my last video, which I'll link to right here, the Canadian citizenship status and the Canadian permanent residency status are pretty close to being the same. With citizenship, you actually get to vote, but permanent residency means you get to stay here permanently. Yeah, you have to renew your card every 5 years, but you pretty much get to stay here no matter what. That's a administrative renewal of your card. It's like renewing your driver's license. You can't have your permanent residency revoked without it going through a judge. There has to be some valid reason. You probably did something bad if they're taking away your permanent residency. So generally it's for life. A lot of people stop there and don't get citizenship. So I want to talk a bit about how I got into the permanent residency system. This again just speaks to my journey, and what I'm going to tell you about doesn't necessarily reflect what everyone else had to do. So if you are thinking of doing this, make sure you seek counsel from a legal professional or an immigration professional here in Canada before you make any big decisions. I'm just telling you my journey. Okay, so the permanent residency system starts with a thing called express entry. I talked about it last time. With express entry, it's basically an online system where you pre-apply. You apply halfway, and then you wait to be selected, and then once you're selected, you finish the application process. The good news about that is you don't have to do all the steps until you've actually been accepted. The bad news is you have to wait. So to recap what I covered on the last video, you want to have work permit for a couple of years, then you want to get your permanent residency for a couple of years, and then after a few years of having permanent residency, you can finally qualify for citizenship. Those are the three basic stages. Some folks come in on just straight work permits. Others, people will come in as a student, and if you're with the right school, then you can actually get a couple of year open work permit after you finish school, so you can stick around and get a job, and then if you can put those 2 years in, you can generally get permanent residency at the end of that process. So that's usually how people get into the permanent residency business. Now let's go deeper dive into permanent residency and express entry. So let's take a look at the website, and I'm going to put the links to these websites I'm looking at right now in the description. So here's the basic 4 steps, and the first 3 you're going to do and then wait to be doing the 4th one. So the idea here is you, number 1, find out if you're eligible. Number 2, you need to get your documents ready. 3, submit your profile. That's where you actually go into the express entry system and upload all your information. And then step 4, where you finally receive an invitation to finish applying for permanent residency. Once you get to step 4, generally, as long as you do all the proper steps after that, you're going to get it. But let's go ahead and look at each individual step. So you want to look to see the eligibility page. You want to make sure that you'll meet the minimum requirements. There's not specifically education requirements, but we'll talk about the point system in a bit. And you do want to have some education on your books. It often gets you additional points. We'll be talking about that in a bit. Your language ability. You do need to speak English or French if you're going to be a permanent residency here. Admissibility. So there's other issues that might come up. And where can you live in Canada? And then talk about some next steps. I'm going to point this out now. When they talk about admissibility, one thing people don't always know, and this actually applies to people visiting, people coming on a work visa, or people coming to do permanent residency. If you've got a criminal record or a felony on your record, and up here a DUI is considered a felony. So if you have a DUI or any other kind of major crime on your record, you might want to call ahead to the CBSA and make sure that there won't be any issues when you come across the border. They don't check everyone's criminal record, but they have a full access to the entire U.S. criminal record system. And if you've got something in your past and they pull you aside and look it up, you're going to get flagged. For work visas and permanent residency, they check everybody very specifically. So just a side note, if you've got a bit of a record, you might want to call Service Canada and CBSA well in advance of coming up here. There are procedures to get up here, even though you have some of that stuff on your record. But I'll just leave it at that. I've seen people get turned around, and I've seen people have to leave the country in 24 hours because it was found out after they arrived and they were kicked out. So just saying. So as part of this admissibility exercise you're going to go through, at some point you're going to have to figure out if you have enough points to qualify under a Canadian experience class. That's specifically what myself and a lot of VFX artists and workers use. You get a point system, and basically they allot certain points for various characteristics, and I'll roll through those characteristics in just a moment. But they also only choose a subset of the highest scoring people. So if you have a low score, you might be waiting longer than if you're someone with a really high score. So first, let's look at the score system, and then I'll show you how likely it is that you would get selected if you got a score of X, Y, or Z. So to figure out the point system, I just made up a typical person and started pumping them through this little calculator that, again, I'll make sure the link is in the description for you. But let's take a look. They look at things like your marital status. They want to know if your spouse is a resident of Canada. They want to know a little bit more about whether or not they're common law. They want to know about your age. Your age actually matters. The older you are, the less points you get. They want to get nice young people in here. So don't be discouraged if you're older, but it's less points. What's your level of education? Whether or not you have a Canadian education or an education outside of the country, you have different point systems. If it's not in English or French, you're gonna have to have it translated. So there's different ways to get your college education to get you some points. We go on to the language assessment. So it goes through and says, do you have test results? How did you score on those? It wants to know what test you took. It'll try to figure out, what class of citizen, if you were here on a work permit. It wants to know what your classification was. Having a work permit can get you a lot of points. I'll mention that it's less points now, but when I first started, there's a 1,200 points are the maximum you can score, and you could get 600 points just by having a LMIA, which is a certain form of work permit up here. If you had that work permit, you're automatically allocated 600 points. That made it a lot easier for me, and they've since reduced that point value for those work permits. So unfortunately, it takes a little bit more. Anyway, the last 10 years, how much experience do you have, both with Canadian experience, work experience, and international work experience? These all get you a certain amount of points. Okay, and then here's where it goes through, and it says, do you have an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment? What knock level are you? Do you have any nominations? I actually don't know how provincial nominations work, but apparently it gets you extra points. Then, of course, they go through the same kind of questions, or at least a subset of those, for your spouse. So you're looking to get 1,200 points, or as close to it as you can. Nobody gets 1,200. And then it goes through all the various factors. So you can look at age, level of education, languages. This all gets you a certain amount of points, subtotal at 366 there. But then there's all these other factors, your spouse factors, your skill transferability, whether or not you have an LMIA or not. These all get you a certain number. And then finally, your provincial nomination, any job offers, meaning that LMIA will get you 50 points. And finally, this person scores 532 out of 1,200 points. And that might not feel like a very high score. And to be honest, it's not the highest score, but I'm confident that someone with this number would generally get selected if they're just patient and wait to be selected. Let's look at those numbers now. Now, I described that they go through and select a certain amount of applicants every, week or two or at some interval. And they select the top tier or the highest scoring of the pool. And this is how it works. Basically, if you look at this list, this is a list of each round of selection, where if you look at the top on October 27th, under the provincial nominee program, they brought in 888 people. That means they're going to look at the top 888 people in the ranked by score, and that meant that they got down to 744. So that means that when they went out there, anyone with 744 or above who was a provincial nominee got selected. Now let's look at Canadian experience class, which again is what I came in under and a lot of VFX and animation workers use. Here we have this year just filtered down to Canadian experience class and some non-specified programs below. If you look here, you'll see that over this last year, they've actually brought in thousands of people where the score got as low as 369, 357, all through the summer there. I know they were really trying to catch up. And so basically as they kind of get through the roster and start processing the next couple of thousand people, the next couple of thousand people, the faster they can go, the more that number goes down. If there's a big rush or a backlog, well then that minimum number goes up. So you can see here that some people, in fact, if you look down there in February, some people scored as low as 75 and still got in. And they did 27,000 people. So they obviously after the COVID, they did some big catch up. That's crazy. I just noticed that number now. So that tells you that no matter what your score is, you're generally going to get in if you just be patient and wait. And one of the reasons they don't have you do the full process up front is some of the stuff's time dependent. And so we're going to go over now what happens if you've done all this process, you've applied online, and you gave them the minimum documents they're looking for, and you're sitting here waiting with a low score for months at a time. And then finally you get that call. So you submitted your initial documents to get through those first 3 steps. And now that you've been invited, you're going to have to submit some additional documents. And you've got about 60 days to send all of that in. So that includes police certificates, medical exams, birth certificates, all kinds of secondary things. And if you've got divorces and name changes in your life, if you've been through a lot of countries in your life and lived in a lot of different places, this can be a big step. So it's definitely important that you've already prepped this well in advance of applying so that when you apply, you're good to go. So getting your police certificate before you even apply online is not an unwise thing. But again, talk to a professional about what the timing should be or read the documentation yourself and make sure you have a plan so that when that day comes and you have your 60-day timer, you can start to apply and submit all your documentation in a timely manner. It's good to point out again, there's going to be some really weird documents depending on your status. If one of your, if your partner is a Canadian, for instance, then you've got to proof of relationship stuff, and they got to figure out, are you really, is this a marriage of convenience? And then there's, aliases, again, name changes. If you have a representative, these things are all additional documents you'll have to submit, and the list is very explicit when you do apply. So that's the point system. That's kind of how it works. Again, I went through in the last video the different tests you have to take and things like that. But I wanted to explain the point system specifically. That's a big hurdle for some people. They feel like they don't have the bona fide education that qualifies. Maybe they don't want to have to deal with translating from another language, the credentials that allow them to get those points. It's different for everyone, but I'll tell you, looking at that, if you're above 300 on your score, and you can just go to the link that I put in the description and just see what your score would be theoretically and play around with the scenarios, you'll see it's not too hard to get to 300 plus. And if you can do that and then just sit tight, generally you can get to be a permanent resident. So for my wife and I, it was a glorious thing to finally get our permanent residency. We didn't want to move the last of our stuff up from storage down in the States until we had our permanent residency. And once we got that in, that's when we knew we were going in for the long haul. And it really, again, like I said in my last video, it wasn't until we got citizenship that I knew that I was all in and was never planning on moving out of Canada for any long period of time again. So I wish you all luck with your permanent residency. I encourage you all to read in detail in the links that I put in across the Service Canada website and the CBSA website on all the things that come with crossing the border. And if you're at all unsure, you can reach out and get an immigration consultant out there. They're a lot cheaper than an immigration lawyer. So, if you're at a studio, you probably can talk to your HR people. They can't give you official advice, but they might be able to point you in the right direction of ways to think or things they've seen other people do. And just the same, there's people at your studio that are likely going through the PR process. So you can always sort of ask questions because they're at your support group. I know myself, I was aligned with all the people who were ahead of me getting their permanent residency, and the people who were following me. We're all talking to each other, trying to help everyone sort through all the pieces. And it's very difficult to pull off, admittedly, but it's a surmountable task. And if you need help, you can get yourself a immigration consultant to help you, guide you through the process to make sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed your T's. So one way or another, do your best. I'd love to see your comments down here. How's it going along for you? Did you get stuck anywhere, or are you stuck somewhere in the process? Let's hear about it. Thanks, everyone. Hope this was helpful. See ya. Takes longer than 60 days. Lizzie, why did you start barking? What? She can do it. I can do it. But everyone who's pulled it off, cut that part out about counseling and use this one. Oops. Let's try this again. And if you get and so, marital status,